Well, hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm alone in Finland and this will be a bit of a different video. But I wanted to showcase some of the stuff that's going on, just so you kind of understand why a lot of stuff has been sort of sideways. And to explain that running water that you occasionally hear in the background in some of my videos, I do have a few aquariums in where I am, and as you can see here, right at the back, if the water level drops a little bit low because I'm away for a while, you will occasionally get that running water noise in one of the aquariums. Some of these have been stuff that's been rescued and things that I'm occasionally trying to bring back to life, but life gets in the way of that as well. So the reason for that first little section down here, to show this mess on the carpet, and I know it's a weird way to start a video, is actually because of this. Now what happened was, this is an air source heat pump. For those of you that don't know, these have external and external components for the most part. There's a few different versions, but the internal unit can be used for heating or cooling, and I have this actually for cooling even though I live in Finland, because the summers here exceed 27 degrees Celsius and it gets uncomfortable. And if you're in a room with a computer that sort of resembles this, then it starts to get particularly warm in the room. And because of the fact that I've got multiple screens, you can possibly see all the way over here, there's another one mounted up there, and there's some other parts outside of this room. It gets warm in here, which is why we had the unit, and we had a worker that did something outside. There's been a bit of problem with our cable and the installation of the new fibre optic, and somebody moved something and it caused this that was on dehumidifier mode to just drop out a whole load of water, and I mean litres. And it hit the desk, which is why everything's in severe disarray. It hit the floor, it hit the computer, and it actually hit, you can even see here, my power socket is in pieces, because we had to take it apart, drain all the water out, and then have to dry it and try and check to see if it can be used again. Technically, if it's just gone wet, then it shouldn't be an issue. However, I'm uncomfortable with how much power is attached to this usually. For my entire rig, and I know this is all over the place because it's just stacking stuff down, but I have a lot of things that are attached to this. Obviously you can see I've got two monitors, there's a third behind me, I've got a set of speakers, and then you can see that I've got USB devices sort of here, etc. In total, when this thing is all clipped together, I have 11 separate sockets that need to be plugged in, sort of in and around this area, not including the aquarium, which has another 3 minimum, for charging and various devices and locking in and stuff like this. So there's a lot of power that run through these, and I want to make sure that they're safe. The floor's like this because I've got to soak up all of the stuff. This floor is actually a false floor. My room is actually, like, this office is essentially an old swimming pool, and the swimming pool is below this floor. So that's lucky, because any of the excess water from any other spills, because there was a spill about a week before this that involved said aquarium and somebody doing something they shouldn't have, but I can pump out the water fairly easily. I just need to get the sort of carpeting dried out, but this carpet is designed to be wet, so it's not too big an issue. But because of the previous issue, being some aquarium water, it doesn't smell great. So a trick if you need to clean a carpet is to put down baking soda, not baking powder, but baking soda, and that's basically the main ingredient in the sort of carpet powder cleaners. So that's what all of the white stuff is. Unfortunately, I don't have the money for that amount of cocaine, and being ADHD, it'd probably just put me to sleep anyways. But that's why there's paper towels and stuff all over here, and we have to mop all this stuff up. But I thought it was a good idea, because I have to pull this apart and check for any water damage and water ingress, to sort of showcase this, because this is the perfect example of an awful case. This is a Cougar Gemini X, which is a dual system case, and in my opinion one of the best looking ones on the market. It is a few years old now. It's sort of maybe 11th generation, 12th generation, 11th generation I would say, if you're talking Intel processors and stuff like that. And it has so many bad ideas all at the same time. Now the first is, you can see that my cable management is absolutely atrocious, and I think that's fair to say. But part of it is because of the way that things are routed, and you can't really do much about them. So as a good example here, your power supply, the exhaust is supposed to exhaust up here. Now as you can see, I've sort of got a clear space here. I'll sort of pull out so you can see this and get some light there. I've got some clear exhaust here. This usually normally sits upright, and it would exhaust vertically. However, if you put a fan here, it would be exhausting straight onto the top. But internally, unless you have a very narrow fan, you don't have enough space to put a fan here. And even if you did, because of the angle where the the PSU fan is here, it's not a great place to actually have it sort of exhaust, so that the air needs to move back the way to go through the next fan. And you get a little bit of like recirculation around about here, and you can actually see it in how much dust collects here, which is why I eventually took the fan out from the top there. On top of that, you don't have enough space when this is in to be able to hook up a radiator with a fan on top of it. Now, it doesn't sound like much, except for the fact that this entire case was sort of advertised on the fact that you could run liquid cooling in both chambers, and there's actually an advert that shows, from Cougar, there's an advert that shows this specific case with a liquid cooling system in this side. But I don't know how they did it, whether they faked it or not, but there is no option to move these these PSU brackets. So you can't have the power supply where it is. So they have to have somehow edited the picture, which you would think if you have to do that for the advertising, it would show you that you're sort of talking shit. This motherboard here, this is my secondary system, and it's an ITX. So the ITX is here. I've got a GeForce RTX 2060 Super, which was just a sort of stock one. It came with one of my previous pre-built cases, and the reason that I've still got it is because it's a fantastic card. It does exactly what you need to. It never runs hot, and sort of cooling wise and things like that. It's just a brilliant card. The problem is that this is actually better sort of inverted, but the orientation of this motherboard means that it has to be this way down. So it's not a big thing because this particular card doesn't run warm, but it would be a problem if you had a bigger card, even in the 20 series GPUs. However, this case came out after the 30 series GPUs were there. Now, if you're running, for instance, one of the big 3090 Strixes, it doesn't actually fit front to back between the glass panel. It also doesn't fit width-wise with the side panel on, because this does have side panels, and the larger of the 3090s doesn't fit. However, I've got a 40 series, which is on the other side, I'll show in a second, but that creates some problems. Next on the issues with this is the fact that with the base fans, again, you've got sort of fans that bring in, but you've got stuff immediately in the way, because if you're running a dual system, your SFX power supply is down here. It can't run two full-size power supplies, which, when you consider the actual size of the case, never mind the fact that it comes in at nearly 50 kilos loaded up, it is something significant. So it is a bit of a pain. And then you've also got some fantastically stupid things. Like, for instance, one of the fans goes on the back, so that if you have to open the back to get access to anything, like, for instance, plug in your stuff in the motherboard, it's supposed to come off, but with the fan still attached, so you can't remove the back properly. And that goes for the same on the other side. They've just carbon copied the actual plate for the other side. As you can see here, it's the exact same plate, except it mounts in the other way, so the fan's in a different position on the other side. And that could have been rectified just by having an extra set of holes screwed in the thing, maybe with some plastic blockers. It's particularly painful when you think about, this has captive screws. The screws are sort of nicely rounded off at the end, so it is a little bit easier to fit them in. But then there was just that sort of stupid idea for fan positioning, coupled with the fact that this actual cutout, which is where your cables would run through, isn't big enough for a normal gauge power supply without crushing it. So if you put a normal gauge power supply cable through there, it's a problem. Never mind the fact that if you don't invert this power supply the way that I have, the actual cable on almost every one, because I've had 2 ROG Strix power supplies and what was the one before that? Oh, I can't remember now. I think it was Thermaltake power supply, where the power cable's on this side and there isn't enough space for it to physically come through without shunting the entire power supply back into the case, because this should actually be further forward according to their specs, but it just doesn't fit. So it's just a whole load of bad design ideas, especially with this little power supply down here blocking access. The thing is that you do have enough space to be able to do this. For instance, if you just brought the drive trays up slightly, which unfortunately you can't do because the screw mounts, although there is a couple, they're in really bad position to get to, so that where you've got a secondary sort of bay here for hard drives, it's very difficult to actually move anything in the right way. So you're left with this problem where the hard drives will actually clash against a GPU, even if it's a smaller one like this. So you can't put it here, and because of the way that the mountings fit, you can't put it higher up. So it creates this weird sort of space where this is your only option, or you have to do something entirely separate that's sort of counterintuitive. Then if you notice, this is a replicated example from bottom and top on both sides, but you actually have enough space front to back in the bottom, in the top, to mount 3 fans, but they only cut it out for 2 fans. And I actually measured this, and I was considering cutting it and sort of remilling the thing, so that I could fit in a 360 AIO, specifically in the top on the other side, because obviously with this you need to mount your AIO, your actual radiator, higher than your pump, and because these are pumps mounted on the head, on the actual CPU, it needs to go that way so that you don't break your pump. If you have something where the pump is mounted in the actual radiator, you could get away with putting it lower. However, that would allow any air leaks to travel to your CPU, which would affect your cooling system. So better not to do that in general. But if they had moved the CPU bracket back, you could actually, and put the right drill points in, you would have had space to put something here, possibly, depending on exactly where the motherboard was. But it just seems like it's a design that's never been sort of built in. And you would think that the first thing that you would do if you're building a case and saying that it's a dual system, and as you can see by the front here, specifically 2 separate power adapters for 2 separate systems, this was the entire purpose of the case, but it looks like nobody ever built a system before releasing it. Now, I apologise for the reflection of the glass because it's difficult to film this section because it is weirdly clean for me. But this is a sort of, if I can get the angle right, it's a good example of the problems you get with this. So this is a GeForce 3070 Ti Strix, and if it's mounted flat on the board, it does not have the clearance. You have to have this door off, because it comes out sort of about a centimetre further. And I was originally thinking about mounting some spacers and some longer screws to be able to actually have this sort of kinked out a little bit, but I eventually decided against it, just because in my local area finding somebody with a lathe that I could borrow or getting somebody to machine the stuff was just phenomenally expensive. So I didn't want to put too much tension on the glass in the way that it is, because I don't trust this case. One of the first things that happened to me with this case was that this glass piece dropped off. It had been in place, it had been running. This was before I had the big Strix. So the 2060 was on this side while I was waiting for a new GPU to come. The other side was just running off of the onboard graphics, and all of a sudden this glass, while I was gaming one night, just bunk straight off. Luckily it didn't smash, but it kind of goes to the build quality of the thing that glass will just randomly drop off of it, even though it's supposed to be firmly attached. But with that all out of the way, I can sort of show you a bit of the system, and you can sort of see here a little bit better what I'm talking about, where I've got a, what is this one? It is a NZXT Kraken 240, and just because of the actual size, sort of side to side, of the 240, you do actually have the space to put a 360 in, space wise, but not because of the way that it's actually been sort of put here. You can see how the dust is collecting from this. But so you actually have the physical space to put in a 360, including having the downspout pipes. But unfortunately, the way that they decided to do this, it's ended up that for some weird reason they made it shorter. I don't quite understand why. But then one of the next things in this is actually sort of the wire running. You can see here that we do have sockets to put the wires through front to back. And if I bring the camera around here, you can see there is a bit of space in the middle. However, none of these edges have been sort of smoothed over or rounded over. So you can't pull cables too hard. You can see we've got spacing at the back, which I imagine is to sort of run these through the middle or something like that. But it's at such a tight angle, it's a royal pain in the backside to do anything. And then you can see here that I've put in a vertical GPU riser just so that I can actually get the GPU inside the case as opposed to external. But with a strict system and just that little bit further back that the vertical GPU riser brings it, it is actually against the glass here, just in front of this glass. However, it does allow at least a little bit of space behind for the airflow, because this is a through flow case. I'm not sure if you can see, our sort of board on the Strix finishes about here, and I think it's actually angled in the way. So you've got fins here that pull in and exhaust up or down, which is why it should be flat. But then the fins on this side, they exhaust straight through. So something like the Lee & Lee, what is it, 11D Evo cases, where you can mount the actual GPU vertically so that tail or head is at the top. There is a specific way to mount it. But those are some of the best cases for this because all of the weight is pushed down the way. However, with the new, sort of the weight on the GPUs, the new ones, this is where you get a lot of problems where the actual pin stack at the bottom, where it's plugging into the motherboard, if it is in the correct orientation, it starts to buckle over time. And you can actually see the bend in this one. I had it mounted sort of normally to the board for about 3 weeks, and you can see the bend already. And this is a heavy sort of aluminium machine frame on that. Is that a bit of plastic or aluminium? That's plastic, but the backing port is aluminium. So there's a lot of machining. This whole front section's aluminium, and still the thing's managing to buckle under its own weight. So it's, for these, I would say if you can mount them this way, then do it. But if you can turn them entirely on their end so that your cable runs are perfect, cable runs are at the bottom, then that's the way to do it to last it as long as possible. For those of you wondering, because I've mentioned about the 4090 in the past, the 4090 I had went because it broke. It broke under warranty, but I just got the thing refunded because what actually went on it was a power cable, and it's such a common thing. Mine was as plugged in as severe as you could get, and it was where it was mounted to the motherboard that it actually went. It wasn't in this case. But I ended up just sort of sacking that off and getting the system going, because I was like, I don't want to deal with those high power requirements on a connector that's not been fully tested. So this has the same connector on it, but the difference being that this uses uses a lot less power, so it's not pulling as much. I run this entire system on an 850 watt power supply, and I never get to maximum. If I turn on both systems and push them to the absolute maximum, on the block connector with both monitors, I'm still below 1.4 kilowatts or 1400 watts. And that's, I think I'm not sure what the G9 is. The LG runs at the same amount as the G7, I think. It's either G7 or G8 that's over there. I think it's G7. But running all three of the monitors and sort of as bright as you can get them, plus everything else, the two computers with power supplies and running sort of high-end testing, the benchmarking softwares, you're usually still under 1.4 kilowatts for the whole thing. And in my opinion, this particular GPU is one of the best that you can buy when you're talking about performance to power usage, because you can get more but you pay a lot more for it. You start paying sort of double or triple the price in power usage for a 3080 than you do for a 3070 Ti, which for me just seems a little bit daft. And that's why I've got the 2060, because I like it. It can game on almost every game at the moment on medium settings. The 2060 Super could run Cyberpunk at not at full settings, but it could run it full screen on this thing, which is 34-inch wide, while operating the second screen, and running on sort of high but not ultra settings, and it was absolutely fine. But then with this one, some of the advantages of it is that you've got a lot of space underneath because of the design. So you've got a lot of room for airflow to be pulled up, to be pulled in. But then at the back of it, again, you've got the problem with this, where the back end of your CPU, of your power board, your motherboard, is so close to the glass that getting a connector in there is more difficult. And it's fine if you're running one connector because that's over in here, but the second connector's a bit further, the third connector's further out. So it's just not been sort of thought out, or they haven't run with full systems. You've got this little attachment point here where you can put in water cooling, but you can't put any tanks there easily because of the cables that are coming off of the front. So you need to stand them off and run the cables behind. And there's a lot of little sort of kinks with this, just the way it's been run. I've just noticed a loose cable on the front end, which might explain why I'm not getting power. But yeah, I thought I'd just sort of show this as a good example of a bad case, because this could have been so much better with a little bit extra thought, and even just accounting for the fact that when this came out, they knew the dimensions of the bigger graphics cards, but they didn't bother to change it. So I'm looking at changing this. I've got one case ordered. I'm trying to see if they'll get it because it stopped production, which is the trying to think of it, but the PTSD's around my brain. It's one of the micro ITX cases, mini ITX, like proper small form factor case. So the secondary board is board is going into the other case, and the idea was to sort of space this out and move the GPU down, using this to keep it flat and supporting it sort of off of the glass, and have the entire case orientated on its side, which is one of the setups that they sort of show for it. But now that I'm sort of looking at it, especially with the lack of space here and the fact that it's just the cabling that's on it, there's not much here in the way. It's just basically these two pipes from the AIO, but they're putting enough pressure on this that it's pushing the entire GPU out and bending the supports back here, which is not something I want to see. So I'm thinking about sacking this off and actually going for something else. I quite like the idea of this new Lee, what's it, the 11D Evo XL, that's the one. Specifically because you can reverse it for left and right, which is a problem I've had more recently. Also because it fits on the shelf that I've got up there. And lastly, because of the vertical mounting for the GPU, because I don't imagine this will be the last GPU, although I'll be changing the motherboard after this system. But I imagine this will go to the kids once they're big enough to use a proper PC. But at the same time, I think that case is something that's expandable for the future, and I would very much like to run a 360 AIO. This is not too bad. It is, in fact, it's very good for cooling, because my temperatures never sort of go above 60 when I'm actively sort of gaming and running everything, and there is quite a lot of load on the GPU because I'm running full res on at least 2 screens, usually 3, because I have things in the secondary stuff, which is why I prefer doing sort of voiceover style as opposed to actively talking when I'm doing the gaming, because I'm usually watching something. But at the same time, one of the things that I absolutely hate is the NZXT hardware, or software actually, it's not hardware. This cracking, the LCD is not bright enough. So anything else, for instance, I've got the Fantex LEDs here. These are Coolmaster fans, which are fantastic, although 2 of them have broken on me and lost the light on the external ring. I had 6 originally. This is one of the spares which is just broken, and I've got another spare to swap this one out to, because I only needed 4 of them. But longevity, not great. Colours, fantastic. But the NZXT software, the actual CAM software inside the computer, has memory leaks like you wouldn't believe. And it turns out they had a memory leak for about 6 years, which was something surreal. Where this is a, what have I got? 128 gig system. I want to check if that's right. Yeah, it's 128 because the other one's 64. I've got a stupid amount of memory just because it was cheap when I was buying it, so I bought more than I needed. But I'm running 128 gig, and the CAM software, just for running this and then managing this, that's it. So I've got the light bars, front and back, on both sides. And those light bars plus managing this, it was actually using over 20 gigs of memory in my system. It didn't affect the system. I didn't notice it going on for ages because of how much memory I've got, because I've got a stupid amount. But when I started to realise what was going on, I had a look about it, and then I found out that problem was a problem for years that they hadn't fixed. Then they did fix it not long after I had seen it. And then about 6 months later, the problem came back, and it was the same problem with the software. And it seems to come back sort of more often. And while I don't notice it on this system, I did notice it on the other one, because at one point the computer was sat idle-ish. It was downloading a whole load of stuff, and it was on for about a week. And when I came to it, it was using something in the realm of 45 gigs for the CAM software out of 64 gigs. And it was the main sort of downloading software, because it was an encrypted thing. That was starting to slow down because it couldn't process the encryption fast enough. And I was just sort of not understanding why it was running so slow. I was getting a call from the other end, and then I had a look at it, and I was like, it's this bloody software. And on the other system, the only thing that it runs is the pump. It's got a Kraken on the other side, but the Kraken 120 actually doesn't have an LCD screen. It just has a little light and like an infinity mirror. And just sort of managing those lights, it was sucking up a phenomenal amount of memory. So my next build or replacement for this, or whatever you want to call it, will not involve NZXT in any way, shape or form. I know, unfortunately, I've also got most of my stuff is ASUS. The reason all of my stuff is ASUS is because I actually came from Acer. I had a few Acer computers, and then I had to deal with their customer service team, and they were absolute bastards. There is no other way to term it. They actually, for one of my laptops that went back to them, they broke the laptop worse than I had sent it in, and then returned it to me and said, oh, there's water damage in your laptop. There was no water damage. I had never seen it. It turns out that those stickers, just if you're in a humid area, like for instance the Lake District in Finland, which is over half of Finland, if you're in a humid area, those stickers will start to turn after about 2 years, or about a year and a half, which means that if you're putting in a complaint sort of within your 2-year period, you're going to get up as water damage every time. And I had to fight them on this constantly. And then one of my other systems, which is also Acer, broke down roughly at the same time. And when I sent that back to them, they returned it to me saying they fixed the problem. And because of the problems with my first laptop going back to them, I'd actually marked my computer. So I called them up and said, the problem still exists. Your engineers haven't even opened the case. And they were like, that's not true. And I said, I put marking tape around the inside of the case so that I'd know if you'd opened it or not, and you haven't done it. So I know you didn't even bother to open the case. I've got video footage of this. Could you please, I'm going to return this to you. You're going to fix it. And it ended up having to be escalated to the consumer rights. And eventually they sent me a new computer because of everything that went on. And I just basically took the new computer and sold the thing immediately and bought something else. And I went from Acer to ASUS, and then now that I've seen, especially on Gamers Nexus, a lot of the problems that have been going on with ASUS as well. This was also a problem years and years ago that I had with Apple, and it's the reason I don't use their products. So it's the entire industry, unfortunately. And as it happens, I got this before I'd seen a lot of the problems, just because I quite like the strict stuff, although looks wise, I think this is a little bit more of a disappointment because it's just got the lights there and nothing else really going on. Although the cooling's phenomenal on it, you can't fault that. But yeah, so I figured I'd sort of show this because it just seems to be a very, what could have been a very good idea and just has had no extra thought put in it. And it seems to me like a lot of industry everywhere is having this. It's not just related to computers or gaming or sort of game manufacturers. I've seen this sort of out in the world, working at kid centres. I've seen stuff like that being done, where somebody's just sort of ignored the obvious thing because they put together an entire plan, they put together an entire activity, but then they didn't decide on running through it sort of as a dry run before anything, giving it a bit of testing. And I actually come from a computing background years ago, although I've not done it for decades. I went to university for computer software development and computer science and artificial intelligence and a whole load of other things. And back then, the emphasis was on testing. You need to make sure that everything's tested, and not just in use case, but pushed to the extremes and see what goes wrong. And a lot of the things that I'm seeing these days is just a lack of testing. Sort of, we'll let the users test it and then we'll see what's going on, because there's a lack of repercussions. If something's broken, then they can fix that one thing or sort of deny culpability and stuff like this. And that's some of the problems I had with this. I actually contacted Cougar when I first had the glass drop off, and I got no response. And I contacted them a few different ways, and then contacted, because that's what the shop that I bought it from was telling me to do. And then the shop tried to contact them, and they didn't give us anything back. They didn't get anything back, so they sort of contacted me and said, we haven't had a response. And I said, well, you're still selling their products, what's going on? And they just sort of bluffed their way through it, and I was just like, what the hell is going on with this? But unfortunately, I quite like the look of this thing. It's just not practical in any sense. Which does sort of, when you get the more artistic stuff, it makes sense, but now it's a case of sort of not just space-wise, but also general cooling, and you can sort of see down here where the fins are getting clogged up by dust. But remember, when we're talking about dust, although I'm in a carpeted room, it is hoovered sort of twice every week, so bi-weekly. But I also have a massive air filter here that gets hoovered out at the same time, so it's kind of weird that it pulls up and sort of catches that much dust around about here, although not too much, as you can see on the inside, because this hasn't been cleaned in years. But yeah, I thought that would be weirdly interesting. And I'll probably release this on its own, and then in a little while, once I get the other stuff sorted, because it's going to be at least a month to get the smaller case in, and probably longer to get the other case, that will sort of show that. But hope this was interesting. Sorry for the state of the entire place, but thanks for watching. Bye.